I walked into 12-step programs, what really, as we say oftentimes, spiritually bankrupt. I mean, bankrupt, right? I walked into rooms and I could barely put a sentence together, right? And I found people there who truly did love me till I could learn how to love myself. So my first 8 years in recovery were grounded in really more than 12-step work, in cognitive behavioral therapy, in a whole bunch of those, that kind of work, but mostly grounded in Y12. I'm sorry, mostly grounded in 12-step. And and things went well. My first eight years in recovery, I went back to school. I got my MBA. My kids had been, they were not with me, right? And so I got my kids back. I got the car back and the house back and all the bling, right? Got all this stuff back. That's when I went back to school. I got an MBA. I got finished my undergrad degree with straight A's. And then I finished my MBA with 1B. And I always say that because what it kind of proved to me is that I hadn't destroyed all the gray matter up here. I hadn't destroyed it all right up there. However, that said, I ended up relapsing after 8 years, right? And it was the whole thing was just looking back on it, the teachings and the learnings within that sequence of events that happened in my life are really amazing. They're really amazing. So I end up relapsing. I relapsed when I was out of the country. I relapsed in Germany, right? And I've been clean 8 years. And I did this international trip because I was doing well in business and the whole 9 yards with this 8 years clean. And I ended up in Amsterdam, right? I left Germany, flew to Amsterdam, and found my drug of choice in Amsterdam. I went directly there for that, right? And as after not having a drink or a drug in my body for 8 years, right? So it was just,
wow.
I know. That said, I finally made it back to the States. Right. I had somebody come over and get me. Right. And I finally made it back to the States. And that was when I found yoga. Well, that was when I was reunited with yoga. Yoga was introduced to me in the 70s. Right. And I strayed away from it. But I came back to it after that relapse. And I got really, really into Ashtanga. Right. And then first it was Bikram, hot yoga. But then I got really, really into Ashtanga and started going deep in the I had an amazing teacher and started going deep in the study. And then after a while, so I'm clean for 8 years, then I relapse, and I come back and I find yoga. And at some point in finding yoga, I started to notice all these really similarities, all these connections between yoga and the 12-step program. I started to notice, and I really got deep in that and studying and looking at all those connections. And then at some point I said, well, if I got yoga, I don't need 12-step anymore. Right. I got sick and tired of hearing the same things in the meetings over and over and over and over. I know some people know what I'm talking about, right? And I said, I don't need that anymore, right? And dealing with personalities, right? And I'm like, I don't need that anymore. And so I just take up yoga, right? And really get deep in the study and notice all these similarities and really get deep in the practice. And then after 4 years clean that way, I relapsed again. Yeah. So I relapsed twice, 8 years and 4 years. But it was after that second relapse, like we've talked about, I noticed that there were some things that I had compartmentalized to a place where I didn't see the interconnection between them, right? And like I was talking about in the introduction with me, yoga means union. It means when you translate it from Sanskrit into English, the word itself means union. It means balance. It means integration. It means wholeness, right? And I compartmentalize things within myself and within my life to the degree that I didn't really get the real connection between the cognitive work that I was doing in 12-step programs and in, CBT and in Western. I didn't get the connection between all that head stuff, all the cognitive work, and what that had to do with soma. And soma's body, right? That's one loose translation of soma, right? It has to do with body. And I didn't really realize the connection between those, right? And it was after that second relapse that I began to put all that together, right? I'm like, well, there's something else going on here, right? There's a connection between those things. In 12-step, we talk a lot about the physical piece of that whole thing, right? We talk a lot about the mind, right? We talk a lot about what's going on in the mind, but we don't put together what connects the mind, the body, and the spirit, right? There's a connection between those things. And of course, that's prana, that's life force, right? And yoga, when in the deep study of that, offers that sense of this, what connects the mind, the body, and the spirit, right? What is it that could really connects the mind, the body, and spirit? So it was after that second relapse, and the other piece of that is what really lives in our tissues, right? The fact that there is no separation really between the body, the mind, and the spirit, right? It's really all the same thing, right? And what really lives in our tissues as well. And so after that second relapse, I'm like, well, these things need to be coupled, that there needs to be a coupleship so that I can support recovery. I can create a sense of sustainable recovery, right, by addressing all of these things and not making them separate, And so that's when Y12 Asara was born, after that second relapse.